Okay. Um, is there anybody that doesn't know about hurricanes in Florida and the Caribbean? I see we even have some Florida people here that chickened out and drove all the way up here. And they admit to it. They were chicken. So I know my law firm has offices in Tampa and Sarasota, and they were packing up all the computers and wrapping them up or protecting them and all the servers and computers and moving them to interior offices. And that's when they thought everything was going to go up the East Coast. So to be honest with you, I haven't checked for the last 2 hours, so I don't know where it's going. Let me just make one quick comment about this. This is a bad storm. Certainly one of the worst in history. Many years ago, in our younger days, Pam and I went to Anguilla and St. Martin. Anguilla has some of the most gorgeous beaches you'll ever see. St. Martin's lovely as well. I haven't seen too many reports from Anguilla just because it's a little smaller island than St. Martin in terms of population. It's about 8 miles away. But St. Martin and Barbuda and and St. Bart's, I mean, I'm seeing numbers of 95% of the buildings ruined or destroyed on those islands. It will be a long time. They're talking about months until a lot of the island will have power. As you probably know, things deteriorate rather quickly without power. I have a friend who has a condo that he rents out down in the panhandle of Florida. And he said when I think it was Hurricane Ivan came through a number of years ago, they had damage. They have about their unit is on the 17th floor. So when they went down to check it, they had to walk up and down 17 flights of stairs. And it was very hot and humid because that's when these storms come about. And they did not have power there in Florida at his condo for 75 days. So I know when, remember that storm that I hate to say the name of it, begins with a D, Derecho. It had like 100-mile-an-hour winds that came through here. Derecho, okay. We didn't have power for 4 days at our house. In 2 days, we were sort of rethinking that, till death do us part of the vow. We went to a hotel and took that option off the table, obviously, but it's very difficult. Keep these people in prayer. It's a very, very difficult time. The convergence of events is just amazing. This week is going to be even more extemporaneous than most weeks is. Just a few verses to keep in mind, though. And ye shall hear of wars, Matthew chapter 24, wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And a similar parallel passage over in Mark chapter 13, Mark records this. But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues ye shall be beaten. And ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published among all the nations. But when they shall lead you and deliver you up, take no thought beforehand what ye shall speak, neither do ye premeditate. Well, whatsoever shall be given you in that hour, that speak ye, for it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Ghost. Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father the son, and children shall rise up against their parents, and shall cause them to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some cultural things. Then I'll talk briefly about the hurricane. But I want to carry on this theme about being hated of all nations that Jesus talked about would come about in the end times. And we live, for those of you who watch overseas, we live, a lot of us really like the United States of America. It gives us certain freedoms and liberties, but those things are changing. And they're changing in a manner that I think has been prophesied. This week, Amy Barrett, a professor at Notre Dame, was having her confirmation hearing. I think she's been appointed as a nominee to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. She is a law professor at Notre Dame. She is a mother of 7 children. During her confirmation hearing, Dianne Feinstein, the leftist, nutty senator from the state of California, had this to say to a nominee for one of the highest courts in the country. Listen to what she said.
When you read your speeches, the conclusion one draws is that the dogma lives loudly within you. And that's of concern when you come to big issues that large numbers of people have fought for years in this country.
How about the people that wrote the Constitution and fought wars and died for it? How can I say this? I pray that age is taking her mind away from her, but I fear that it is ideology instead. She is a leftist, and this lady, the audacity to say to this mother of 7 children, she should be a feminist icon. You are a law professor, you're being nominated to a court of appeals, and you have 7 children, and all she concerned, this leftist wingnut is concerned about, is that the dogma lives loudly within you. It's disgusting. It's despicable. That's deplorable. And it's when their leaders say stuff like this, it's like, okay, California, if you want to leave the union, go ahead, okay? Just leave us the good parts of Orange and Riverside and San Bernardino counties and up through the valley where the farmland is. Take San Francisco and its high overpriced real estate. And, the Constitution does say this. There is a Constitution, and it says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. But who they hate the most, not people who oppress women, it's evangelical Christians. So Dianne Feinstein and her despicable comment is Exhibit A as to why you can't let the left be in charge in this country. But it's also part of how the prophecy of Jesus is being fulfilled. I get that, okay? But I live in a country where I can fight it. And here's Exhibit B. This is from Foreign Policy. There is a battle going on in our government as to who's going to control agencies. We know what's going on at the Department of State, that a lot of things that Trump wants to do are being opposed. Things that Obama put in place to make it difficult for Trump are being instituted and followed up on by Rex Tillerson. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if they got to him. He wants Israel to pay back $75 million that the Congress decided to give because it violates that memorandum of understanding that Obama made Israel sign right at the end. Like, a contract can't ever be modified. I spent 3 days modifying a contract for a client this week. Trust me, I know this. Contracts can be modified. But there's this feeling at state that what Obama put in place has to be followed up on. He's gone, right? We know he's not, but he should be. But this article in Foreign Policy, I think, raises another concern. I'm going to read a little bit of this. More white, more male, more Jesus. CIA employees fear Pompeo is quietly killing the agency's diversity mandate. So what do they talk about? The cancellation, now under review by the CIA's Office of General Counsel, according to a second source, left employees disheartened. Well, what was canceled? Well, supposedly the parents of Matthew Shepard were to come and talk to the CIA people in Langley about diversity. Their son, the claim is that their son was murdered because he was gay out in Wyoming. Remember the story? Now, there's a lot of questions as to whether that story, that narrative is actually true. But that never matters to people on the left and to the ideologues on the left that permeate government, even at the CIA, which is apparent from this article. So they canceled it, and everybody was, oh, this is just terrible. Left employees disheartened, particularly those invested in the diversity reforms that were emphasized during the tenure of John Brennan, the former CIA director. By the way, this article in Foreign Policy discusses, as you'll see, the religion of Mike Pompeo, the new director of the CIA, but it never mentions John Brennan's religion, does it? Isn't that interesting? In March 2013, Brennan was appointed director under President Barack Obama, and the new CIA had moved to make diversity and employee rights a priority. Senior leaders competed for spots to speak at employee gay pride events and accompanied the director to diversity events and celebrations. While embraced by many, Brennan's policies drew the ire of right-wing publications like the National Review, which claimed his diversity and inclusion strategy was just a way to make the agency more politically correct. Well, guess what? I don't agree with a lot of what National Review says, but in this one, they were right. But for Brennan, the changes were a matter of building a better workforce as well as a national security. I believe strongly, he said, that diversity and inclusion are what this country is all about. He had never read this document, I don't think, or he didn't believe in it. I can think of no organization that can make a better business case for diversity and inclusion than the CIA. We have the responsibility of covering the globe, understanding all societies, cultures, and backgrounds. Now, the implication of this is that if you're not like a certain person, you can't understand culture, where they're coming from. You can't analyze it. And so what did they do at the CIA? They brought in a lot of people from a particular religion, didn't they? Brennan was particularly concerned about the alienation of the CIA's Muslim employees. Over the last couple of years, we really tried to make a real effort to have the Muslims within the CIA workforce feel that they were as special and as valued and as important as everyone else. Too often, there has been an unfortunate rhetoric that has been the equivalent of Muslim bashing. A lot of employees took that rather personally. But here's the kicker. Pompeo, an evangelical Christian, has said previously that Islamist terrorists will continue to press against us until we make sure that we pray and stand and fight and make sure that we know that Jesus Christ is our Savior, is truly the only solution for our world. Guess what? Good for him. It's about time somebody stood up. And boy, he's getting fire for that. The concerns are not that Pompeo is religious, but yes, it is. But that his religious convictions are bleeding over into the CIA. According to 4 sources familiar with the matter, and they got everybody's got sources these days, but they're never named. Pompeo, who attends, this guy is dangerous. Why? He attends weekly Bible studies held in government buildings, referenced God and Christianity repeatedly in his first all-hands speech and in a recent trip report while traveling overseas. According to a profile by the Washington Post, Greg Miller, Pompeo is working on starting a chaplaincy for the CIA campus like the military has. Michael Weinstein, Michael Weasel Weinstein, the former Air Force officer who founded the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, Freedom from Religion, says he has been seeing increasing complaints from those inside the intelligence community. Certain things are making them especially uncomfortable, such as officials signing off with the phrase, grab onto your seats, folks, have a blessed day. Now, my concept of and I know it's not right, a CIA spy is, James Bond. Okay? Would James Bond be, going into a panic attack or a meltdown, psychological meltdown because, the head of the Secret Service there in Britain said, James, have a blessed day. This is what passes, though. This lady, she's a former Muslim. She stands up and speaks out against female genital mutilation. She has had her account banned by Twitter. If you go to her page now, it says account unavailable. To which somebody said, tweeting about the rape of Pakistani children by Pakistani men is the new hate speech. How they rejoice yet are silent on rape of children. The left has lost its minds. Here's a little clip from Dennis Prager on Tucker Carlson the other night, kind of talking about where the left is coming from. I do appreciate Dennis.
The city council in Charlottesville, Virginia, is voting tonight on whether to remove its statue of Stonewall Jackson. This comes 1 month after Antifa and the alt-right rioted over the fate of the Robert E. Lee statue. Both monuments are currently covered with burqas to protect the very sensitive people of Charlottesville from fainting at the sight of them. Similar statue battles are being fought in dozens of cities across the country. Dennis Prager's a radio show host. He says the battle over statues is a massive distraction from real life. Dennis, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So what is
always
this
good
about
to be
exactly?
with you, Tucker.
Thank you.
Well, the thesis of my column is very important that I set this out at the outset. Is those who do not fight real evil fight statues. This is part of a rule of life that I established many years ago. I think it's a defining characteristic of the left, not of liberals necessarily, but of the left. And that is they don't fight the biggest evils, they fight made-up evils instead. They didn't fight communism, they fought anti-communism. They don't fight Islamism, they fight Islamophobia. This is another example of that. Real evil, the left is AWOL. Statues, they don't fight back, and they're immobile. You're not going to get hurt smashing a statue, so this is their big battle.
Why not just fight real evil? Wouldn't that be more productive?
Yes, it would be, but then, look, this is a very tough question. Why don't people fight real evil is one of the great philosophical questions of life. Why do they fight littler evils? I think in part, I hate to say it, because there are some nice people all over the political spectrum, but I think ultimately it's tough to fight real evil. Look, the left fights, for example, religious fundamentalism in America, right? Those nasty Christians. But when it comes to the Ayatollah Khamenei, they're pretty AWOL again. The really bad religious crowd, they have nothing to say about. So who do they fight? really tough people like Franklin Graham. These are the real threats to America. Wherever you look, that's what the left does. They don't fight the real threats.
The coming theocracy, remember that? And yet when,
that's right.
There's
Theocracy,
sex segregation according to Sharia, like that's totally cool. You don't let your wife drive a car or go outside except with male relatives. That's totally fine, different culture. But I wonder if refusing to fight evil is in complicity with it.
Oh, in the final analysis, if you hate Reagan more than you hate Brezhnev, then you have aided Brezhnev. I'm not saying that they were pro-communist. What they were was anti-communist. When Ronald Reagan said that the Soviet Union was an evil empire, the left went ballistic.
I remember
it was
vividly.
a truism.
So
it was a simple truism.
It seems rooted in us, and I hate to reduce it to this because I'm not trained as a shrink. I was a Russian history major, but a lot of this seems like working out of psychological impulses, and underlying a lot of this seems the deep need of many on the left to feel virtuous. Like, I'm a good person. I have proved that I'm a good person, and you're not.
There's a little proof to that. You know who started the self-esteem movement? Nobody talks about this, but I was there at the beginning. It was founded in my state, California, by
I know exactly
a late state senator, John Vasconcellos. John Vasconcellos was a liberal Democrat member of the state Senate in California. I had him on my show, and he said to me, this was not hidden, he was a wonderful man, actually. He said, I realized when I was in therapy that I lacked self-esteem as a kid, so I realized how important self-esteem is, and you were right, this was truly acting out some psychological phenomenon of his own life. And it turns out that the self-esteem movement has been utterly destructive. And I have proof for that, too. Everyone watching should ask the kindest, finest adults they know the following question. Did you have high self-esteem when you were a child? Every single good, kind person will say no.
Of course. It's totally obvious.
Okay. Good. You can find the rest of that at Fox News in their video archives. So, here's something that the president did in the Colorado Baker case, Masterpiece Cake Shop. The Department of Justice came in this week and filed a brief in support of the cake baker. That's great. I think I have you here. Of course, Slate magazine calls it a cake wreck, and they say that their brief is cynical, dishonest, and embarrassing. Here's the embarrassing part that they said. The argument that the Department of Justice adopts and supports in this case is a custom wedding cake is a form of expression, whether pure speech or the product of expressive conduct. It is an artistic creation that is both subjectively intended and objectively perceived as a celebratory symbol of a marriage. And they go on to say that, in the Slate article, they say the brief strives to avoid this problem because it is at bottom a political document. Attorney General Seth Sessions recently gave a speech to the Alliance Defending Freedom, thanking the organization for its important work defending religious liberty. Through Sessions, listen to this. This is what they think. President Trump is discharging his obligation to appease the bigots in his base. The DOJ's efforts, however, may prove counterproductive. This brief will highlight the court's reactionaries who favor religious supremacy and disdain gay rights. But it can only estrange Kennedy, who nobly has allowed an LGBTQ non-discrimination policy to trump a First Amendment claim in the past. That's fine. And Kennedy will go away eventually. And hopefully, the president will appoint somebody who will not put up with this nonsense and the Republicans in the Senate will confirm this new judge, although that seems to be a day-to-day thing that is in question, whether the Republicans in the Senate will actually do anything. But that's a whole nother discussion. They are the majority, by the way. I do remember that. So this is a big storm coming in, and you can see this is what they did. Took a 7-day time lapse of the. You can see Irma coming in here, and you can see Jake right behind Irma. And so, what's that? It goes up through yesterday. Oh, Jose. I said, what did I say, Jake? Well, that's English for Jose, right? Okay, whatever. It's not the worst. Now, there's a whole bunch of theories that are coming out about this. Of course, like articles in the Independent and elsewhere. Yeah, see, this proves that global warming is right, even though we really haven't had a bad hurricane hit Florida since 2004. I think there's been one, or 2005, and it's not the worst one ever. And the interesting part about this article, aside from the global warming thing in the Independent, is these storms changed the face of the country. For example, in 1900, they didn't have satellites though, but this is a drawing somebody prepared of what happened to not Houston, but Galveston, Texas. I mean, here's the headlines from the San Francisco Call. Thousands died in that storm. Here's a picture of one section of Galveston. Thousands. I mean, I think it was 5,000 or 6,000 people died. It was pretty bad. And the result of that was Galveston at the time was a really big port. And it ceased from being a port, and they moved up the coast a little bit to a little bit more inland area that could be a port, now called Houston, which has now got big problems. I mean, they have big. I mean, we think, oh well, I mean, our memories are so bad now that all the suffering in Houston is sort of like, well, the traffic is bad in Florida. We're really concerned about that, but we kind of forget about all the problems in Houston. And then these islands out there were just Anguilla. I mean, this is, and then this earthquake in Mexico, 8.1, I hear maybe hundreds dead. Even the AP the other day said this: winds, fire, floods, and quakes, a nutty run of nature. And it's sort of like they're seeing these things happen, but they don't know how to deal with it. And Christians, look, I don't know if somebody's got a big machine someplace that's caused these things to happen. If their goal was to wipe out a large population base in Houston, they didn't do a very good job of it. They only got like 40 people. But then again, it's not global warming. And you cannot discount the fact that these may be messages that God is sending to us as a country to repent. Get your act together. And there really is, I mean, I hope you appreciate, there's a lot going on in the world this week. And there are millions of people that are on the road that weren't 5 days ago. It's very disruptive. It depending on how the storm goes today, you don't know what's going to happen. I was in Florida about 4 weeks after Charlie hit. I actually had a client down in Port Charlotte, so I drove down there, and it was 4 weeks after the storm, and it was surreal. There were no road signs. Big towers were bent over. Whole trees on one side of the hurricane were this way. On the other side, they were the other way. Mobile home parks of 250 homes. There was the corner of one of the 250 left. The rest were there are huge piles of trash everywhere. This is a a populated area in St. Martin. The same time this is going on, there's these fires in Oregon and Washington and Montana and Idaho. People leaving on the road. Everybody's concerned about what's going on. And listen to this is if you can turn the sound up a little bit. This is from St. Martin. Sound. Now, I think it's nice to have these videos to kind of see visually what's going on. But I do question the sanity of the person who is standing there thinking that they could hold an iPhone behind a wall, that they would be okay. This is Phillipsburg and St. Martin, commercial district, storm surge. Pretty amazing, powerful thing. So we'll have to see what's going on. So I don't have a lot of things to say about this is a comparison of the size of Irma compared to Andrew that hit Homestead, Florida, south of Miami, about 1995. It's 5 times the size. It was 92? Okay, it's 25 years ago. That's right, 25 years ago. And I've seen pictures of that. It just devastated the homes. It led to better building codes, which may result in less damage this time. So let's go to geopolitics for the time that we have left. This was a big conference of the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China, that took place in China this week. So you see Putin, you see the head of China there as well. And then, what's that guy's name from India? Modi? Is that your dog's name, Pastor Steve? Oh, not Mowgli, that's Mowgli. You can check Pastor Steve's Facebook page for that pictures of that dog. As they say, it's a very friendly dog, and it has to be, because if you've seen this thing, nobody would feed it. It's not. Look, it has its own level of cuteness that I just don't appreciate. So, I mean, I like the thing, but it's just it's a unique looking animal. So here we have this nuclear thing. The president had the Emir of Kuwait there today, and this question came up. Just a quick from one of the Arab news journalists.
You dispatches a team to Israel and Palestine, and you're about to meet the leaders of both countries in the UN soon. Do we expect a new American initiative to move the process forward? And if I may, sir, the UN has just published a report about Syria's Assad regime using chemical weapons. They said that basically use it more than two dozen times. Does that mean that President Assad is immune now from any prosecution? And what can you do to stop the further use of chemical weapons? Thank you.
Well, first of all, the Palestinians and the Israelis, we are discussing, we are working. They say it is the world's most complex and difficult deal. You know that. But it is something that could happen. I believe that the relationships that we have with both can help. It's an event that's just never taken place. Sometimes people think they're close and it never happens, or it never happens successfully. I think we have a chance of doing it. I think the Palestinians would like to see it happen. I think the Israelis would like to see it happen. And usually when you have two groups that would like to see something happen, good things can happen. So I think there is a chance that there could be peace. But again, I say that a little bit reluctantly. We're going to give it our best. We have tremendous talent working on that particular transaction. As you know, David Friedman, the ambassador, is very much involved. We have a great group of people. We'll see what happens. As far as the chemical weapons, I find it hard to believe that after what we did the last time, that Assad would do that again. I haven't heard what you just said, but I find that a little bit difficult to believe. But nothing would change. We would be extremely upset if he was using chemical weapons. As far as Syria is concerned, we have very little to do with Syria other than killing ISIS. What we do is we kill ISIS. And we have succeeded in that respect. We have done better in 8 months of my presidency than the previous 8 years against ISIS. So ISIS is rapidly disappearing, as you know, and that's because of our great military. The military has been absolutely incredible in terms of what they've done with ISIS in Iraq and in Syria.
Well, I know there's a desire to achieve peace between Israel and Palestine. I would issue a cautionary thing that when the United States in the past has been one of the leaders in trying to do this, and when they do it, things happen. Now, I'm not saying that these things are necessarily connected, but it happens all the time. And I think I just wish we know when they try this, things happen. So why don't we not try it and see if nothing happens? I mean, let's just kind of prove that there's no connection. But that never seems to happen. And the more we push, the more we get. And it causes, I personally think the disruption in our government is tied to that. In 2011, we went to Israel, and we got to the airport. And after a quick trip of 3.5 hours through Israeli security at the airport, I finally got to sit down. And I was about ready to go into shock because I had very bad arthritic knees in those days. And so I sat down, and I was sitting there, and there was a guy, an Orthodox Jew, standing there next to me. And I mentioned, I might have been to Jerry Clapham. I may have said something like, "Did you see Dave Barry's latest article?" You know, he's a humorist. And this guy goes, "Oh, I love Dave Barry. Oh, here. Look at this article about Dave Barry's colonoscopy that my sister sent me." And he hands me his computer. And because our flight was then delayed about 3.5 hours, I sat there, and he sat and stood there and talked to me the whole time. And we had a wonderful conversation. And he said, "You know, when you people mess around with Israel, stuff happens. And you Christians need to talk about it, because if I say it, nobody will believe me." And I said, "Well, you know, my friend Bill Koenig has written a book, Eye to Eye, and he talks about Katrina." He goes, "Katrina, that's exactly right. You know, the same proportion of your country was evacuated as you forced us to evacuate from Gaza. A direct proportional relationship." And he went on and stuff that I'm like, you know, I better call up Bill Koenig and say, "You know, Bill, your research was a little bit shallow in the book, because this guy's got a lot more for you." And it was interesting. We had a great conversation. And when we departed, I said, "Well, you know, this is it was this great coincidence," I said, "happened that we ran into each other." And he looked at me, and he pointed at me, and he said, "This, my friend, was a divine appointment." So, you know, so I got smacked like I should have for not recognizing exactly what was going on. So we had a great conversation. I say this disruption happens on many levels. So there seems to be this correlation between what's going on in the United States and what's going on in Israel. So every time Donald Trump Jr. gets in trouble, the Israeli left goes, "I see your Donald Trump Jr. potential indictment, and I'll raise you a potential indictment for the wife of Benjamin Netanyahu." And they're doing the exact same thing to Netanyahu that they're doing to Trump. They're on this fishing expedition, and They're getting people that were used to be in his administration and inner circle to turn on him. They're doing the same thing. Mueller's doing the same thing here, and they're out there and they'll spend tons and tons of money. So she's supposed to be indicted this week. I hear she took a lie detector test and passed it, but that doesn't matter, okay? Because why? What's the ultimate goal here? Get rid of Netanyahu. Destroy him. You know, sort of like that scene in the Ten Commandments, you know, where Pharaoh is exiling Moses. And he says, let the name Moses be stricken from every obelisk and monument. Let the name Moses never. That's what they want to do with Netanyahu and Trump. So the president of Israel, Rivlin, went to Germany this week to talk to Angela Merkel. And he told her, the headline summarizes it, that Iran and Hezbollah are forcing Israel to react. Now, I would think that if you have sufficient capacity to fog a mirror, as they say, you know, you breathe on it and it would fog up, that you would know that this is the case. It's obvious, right? That Iran and Hezbollah are up to no good. Why? How do we know that? Because they said it. That's what they say all the time. We want to annihilate Israel. But Rivlin felt that he needed to go and educate Angela Merkel. And there was a great article over at American Greatness this week, What's the Matter with Germany, written by Robert Curry, I'm sorry. And it's What's the Matter with Germany? Now, Dennis Prager, who you heard earlier, he sort of has a rule of thumb that when it comes to geopolitics, Germany is almost always wrong. That's where you sort of start. And this guy puts like intellectual muscle to it in a book that he's written and in this article. Listen to what it says. Germany is making trouble again. This time it's not sending young men in uniform swarming across its borders to conquer Europe. Instead, it is using its position of economic dominance to cause young Muslim men from outside Europe to swarm across Europe's borders. In World War II, by the way, this guy's not getting invited to speak at the CIA anytime soon. Well, he certainly wouldn't under Brennan, but that's another thing. In World War II, he says, Germany's conquest of Europe and subsequent defeat left the continent in ruins. This time, however, Germany's actions seem designed to bring about Europe's destruction by inviting conquest rather than by initiating it. First the Kaiser, then Hitler, now Angela Merkel. Over and over again in different ways, Germany's hubris has invented ways to take Europe down. How can we possibly be here again? And he goes on to talk about the Enlightenment was a period of political revolutions in Britain, America, and France. Those revolutions resulted in radical change in thinking in those three countries. During the Enlightenment era, there was a crucial parting of the ways between Germany on the one hand and Britain, America, and France on the other. And he concludes with this. I mean, he goes on, he says, there's another person who wrote about this and the development of this, that Germany hated Napoleon because he was sort of post-Enlightenment, and what Germany developed was this sort of romantic ideal of the conquering hero, and that's what they became about. And it bore out in the 20th century. At least there were two major wars that Germany was at the hub of, and he concludes with, and this one writer who wrote about this historically, a guy named Berlin, actually, he said that what Germany's approach to this was, that the terminology he used was satanic. And I think he's right if you watch what has happened there. And he concludes with this: if the West wishes to avoid a repetition of the destruction and disasters of the last century, it would do well to consult its own Enlightenment tradition and to marginalize the thinking of German romantics like Merkel, who recall an intellectual tradition that can demonstrate no positive historical achievement. And you know what? I think this guy's right. He was on Dennis Prager this week, and it was a great interview. If you can find that, you should go for it. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation on the northern border of Israel. And for example, this is a article by Dr. Mordecai Kedar of the, he's a scholar in Arabic, Islam, and Middle East issues, writes for a number of publications. And in late August, he published this: after Iran occupied Syria, it will destroy Europe and North America. And it talks about the plan that's going on. And now this is a Jewish writer, a good thinker. And in the first part of this article, he says, Iran and Russia. Now, does this sound at all like anything that we've read, like in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39? Iran and Russia plan to destroy Western Europe, the U.S., and Canada by means of a new wave of millions of Syrian Sunnis fleeing to the west to escape the Shiite takeover of Syria. Now, I played a clip of the head of NATO's armed forces, Breedlove, about a year and a half ago, where he said this, that was they were causing Sunnis to invade Europe, and Europe was, and Merkel particularly was going along with it because she just doesn't, she doesn't have a moral compass. If she does, it's broken terribly. Listen to what he says in this. In my weekend column 2 months ago, I claimed that Iran is the real victor in the Syrian civil war, using the war against ISIS as a smokescreen, is making large swaths of Syrian territory, mainly in the scarcely populated middle and eastern parts of the country and the more fertile and densely populated west of Syria. There are Iraqi, Afghan, and Iranian Shiite militias augmenting Lebanese Hezbollah fighters who were given carte blanche to do whatever Hassan Nasrallah decides to do there. And essentially what's happened is half the country's gone. All the Sunnis are being forced out. They're being marginalized. They're going to be forced out of Iraq. And so when I hear the president says, well, we're just here to kill ISIS, I'm concerned because that creates a vacuum. What happens with a vacuum? Something fills its place. What's filling its place in all of these places? Iran. And it's a huge concern. And so you can look up Kedar's article, After Iran Occupies Syria, It Will Destroy Europe and North America. At the same time this is going on, there is a bill coming before the Knesset to approve, to regularize or legitimize 4,000 Jewish homes that were built in Judea and Samaria, supposedly on Palestinian land. Now, Roger Cohen in the New York Times, like, oh, this is just more of Netanyahu's no state solution. He doesn't care. He's going to blow everything up. He's going to cause war and all of this. And then what was the other thing that was happening in Jerusalem this week that everybody was concerned about on the left was this eviction of a family from a home in East Jerusalem, Palestinian family, after 53 years, 20 of which they've not been paying rent on the home, but that's kind of irrelevant. You know, the little facts like that never bothered to people. And it's, the whole situation is very volatile. Iran, Hezbollah on the northern borders, Syria, Russia kind of filling in all those blanks up there, ISIS being taken out in Iraq and Syria, Iran moving into those areas, the Sunnis under duress in Iraq, Saudi Arabia is kind of making, you know, we really want to get along with you, Iran. Maybe we have some things in common because Saudi Arabia is afraid of what's going to happen to it. In the midst of all this, Israel goes up to the northern, and they're having for the next week and a half, they started earlier this week, their largest military exercise in 20 years. Now, I've played you clips of the Israeli Air Force head who says that the next time there's a Lebanon war, and he doesn't say if there's a Lebanon war, the next time there's a Lebanon war against Hezbollah, we're going to do in 48 to 60 hours what it took us 34 days to do in 2006. And it'll be kind of a shock and awe. Speaking of shock and awe, is this kind of interesting thing that happens is that, again, Israel, like they did 10 years ago with the North Korea nuclear reactor, remember that North Korea nuclear reactor built in Syria, Israel flew up, they flew all the way up the coast, went across southern Turkey, dropped the external fuel tanks for these two jets, and they came down the Euphrates River Valley and they bombed this Syrian reactor, destroyed it, and flew back. And the word is they did all that and they never had a single shot fired at them. right after Syria had installed the most sophisticated Russian anti-aircraft missile and aircraft detection radar and anti-aircraft missile batteries. And nobody fired a shot. It was like they were blind. And then this week, they go up and they bomb a chemical stockpile or a chemical weapon factory up near Homs. It probably flew close to right over the Russian airbase. They flew over Lebanese territory. Lebanon is all upset. They're filing a complaint with the UN. And I don't know if they got a shot fired on them this time either, but they destroyed these plants. Melanie Phillips has a great article about this, the Iranian symptom of the West autoimmune disease. She builds off some articles. This article from AC Democracy, Iran recruits captured ISIS fighters to target the U.S. Wait a minute, what? What? Yeah, I thought they were Sunni, and I thought Iran was Shia. When they have a common enemy, it doesn't make any difference. And the problem that you have is these guys take a long view. Well, here, I'm going to just play a couple minutes of this because of time. It's about 8 minutes long, but I'll just play a few minutes. I talked to Brian Schrager of Jerusalem Journal this morning in, well, you'll see the separation barrier there in Bethlehem where he was standing when we spoke. Brian, the other day there was an airstrike by the Israeli Air Force against a chemical weapons facility or chemical weapons or some other production facility for missiles or something like that in Syria, up near Homs, pretty far into Syrian territory. And the Lebanese government has indicated that they're going to be filing a protest with the government or with the UN about Israel invading or breaching Lebanese airspace. And so tell me what you know about what happened up there in Syria the other day.
Well, it's all but certain that Israel bombed a chemical weapons facility up near the Russian airbase north of Lebanon and near the Mediterranean Sea. Immediately after the airstrike took place, although Israel did not acknowledge it and won't, at least probably for some time, the foreign minister of Israel came out and said that we will do whatever we must to protect the citizens of Israel. And perhaps a day later, the foreign intelligence chief of the IDF came out and publicly said, we are fighting the enemy both near and far. It's interesting, too, that this strike came right on the heels of a UN report that confirmed the use of chemical weapons by Syria. So it was no accident that this took place when it did. It sent a very clear message. It was intended to send a message to several people. Israel intended to send, in as much as Israel did this, and we are all but certain that it did, the message to Hezbollah was that we are here to fight and win. The message to Putin and to Trump is that as things now change in Syria, Israel will no longer be a bystander, as it has been throughout the last 6 or 7 years in the war that's taken place there. Israel has a vested interest now in this reshaping of Iran. And of course, Israel's primary concern is that Iran has come out as the big winner in Syria, with troops now coming across into the country, all along the border with Iraq, and then down into the southern part of Syria next to Israel's borders. So Israel's sworn enemy is now literally at the gate. So that bombing was intended to send a message to a number of people, both here in the Middle East and around the world.
And as you're observing this, it's clear that the big problem is the growing Iranian geographic presence and influence throughout the region. not both, in Iraq, in Syria, and of course in Lebanon through Hezbollah. How do you think that how is it being viewed there on the ground in Jerusalem and in Israel, the Iranian problem, and maybe a potential war with Hezbollah?
Well, Israel is all but certain that war is coming. In fact, I believe it was last Wednesday they began the largest war game exercise they've done here in 20 years, primarily in the north, and it is an exercise that is intended to prepare the troops for this war, but also it's intended to communicate to Hezbollah that this time we're not going to just fight to restrain you, we're going to fight to defeat you. And of course, in as much as that's a message to Hezbollah, it's also a message to Iran. It's interesting because Iran is the big problem. It has, in Syria now, at least achieved the infrastructure of a land bridge going from Tehran across Iraq, across Syria, now into Lebanon, to the Mediterranean. This is really the recreation of the ancient Persian Empire.
And he's right. And we are intending to do more regular interviews with Brian from Jerusalem and Israel in the future. He puts out a daily report, by the way, called the Haim Report. I'm supposed to say Haim Report, but I say Haim Report. I don't say the Chaim Report, but and JerusalemJournal.net, you can get that there. You can like their Facebook page. You can share that around. It's a very good compilation of things that are going on over there. And so pray for Brian and his safety. When he was doing this, of course, people are driving by, edited some of it out, yelling and at him because what's this American doing, filming himself by our separation barrier for some reason. But so very interesting time. So let me just, I have to kind of go here because we're bumping up against the time that everybody needs to leave. At some point, I intend to talk about this article that I found over at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Perfect Storm, the Implications of Middle East Chaos. It was written back in July of 2015, but I think it's a very good forward-looking article. But there's another one also over at another strategic studies place that I'll close with today. And here's another one, Israel's Intelligent Options in Judea and Samaria, by the same author, a more recent one that just came out a month or so ago. But this one, written by Martin Sherman, you can find it at aljaminer.com and some other places. I think it's a very important article. Sherman has been, he's had some disagreements with Caroline Glick. He's been a supporter of the two-state solution. Of course, she believes Israel should just take it over. And he says she's, naive in her optimism. I agree with almost everything she says, but I disagree 100% with her solutions. But he even came out recently and said this Temple Mount thing is very important to the Jewish psyche. He's a non-observant Jewish person, non-religious, but he talked about, I read some quotes from his article, but I've changed my mind about how important this religious aspect is, essentially, is what he's saying, of the Jewishness. And it's interesting because I think it shows the slow awakening of the Jewish people to the things of the Lord and God and that type of thing. And we know there's this great promise that will eventually be fulfilled, and that I think we should all be working towards that phrase in Romans chapter 11, all Israel will be saved. But he has this article, Conflict Management, the Collapse of a Concept. And I would encourage you to go and look up the article. Brian, I'll try to get you the URL for that so you can put it in the description of the video. He starts off with this quote from the history of the Peloponnesian War, 431 BCE, quote, "To remain at peace when you should be going to war may often be very dangerous." And he goes on to talk about all of the situations over the years where Israel has been engaged in kind of conflict management and kicking the can down the road. For example, when they evacuated from Gaza, when they had problems with Gaza in those days, there's a statement in here that says when they did that, Gaza could shoot the rockets 5 kilometers and they could put 5 kilograms of explosive on them. Now they can shoot at 100 kilometers and put 100 kilograms of explosive on them. And as Brian said later in the interview with him, there's 7,000, or there are 100 to 150,000 rockets that Hezbollah has now in southern Lebanon. And they think they could launch as many as 7,000 in it, 4 to 7,000 in one day. Now, maybe Israel shoots down 90% of them. So let's see, 700 rockets, 90%, 10% would be 7,000, 90%. That would mean 700 missiles get through in one day. Is that an acceptable, manageable risk? No, it's not. So Israel is being pushed back against the wall when it has to do something. And I'm telling you, they're having their largest military thing. Russia is there. Iran is there. Iran's controlling the region in many respects. It appears that something is on the near horizon. We know that prophetically there are things that are talked about. We know that Israel's gone up and bombed chemical weapons factories in Syria. We know there's a prophecy about the destruction of Damascus. All of these things seem to be on the very near horizon. And I have talked to Mike, and I have talked about this, Pastor Steve and I have talked about this. We're at that point in history where some Sunday, people that do prophecy updates like me, J.D. Farag, and Charlie Garrett down in Sarasota, by the way, pray for Charlie. He did an update and then bugged out today. The Superior Word. Amir Sarfati, Jacob Prash, doing a weekly update now. At some point, I think we're going to have to stand up and say, okay, this is that which was prophesied by the prophets. And you need to pray for us, because that's a very difficult thing to navigate, I think. I'm not comfortable doing it on my own. And I don't think any of the other guys are that do this on a regular basis. But Tom Hughes out and Barry Snagger out in California, they do it as well. Pastor Jack Hibbs is doing some. It's going to be a very difficult thing to navigate, but we need to be sensitive to this. And what he says, what Martin Sherman says in this article is that until now, the policy has been what they would, somebody was referred to it as mowing the grass in Gaza. The weeds get up there and you got to go, you don't want to, but every now and then you got to go cut the grass. By the way, personally, one of my least favorite things that I do. If I didn't have something to listen to, I would detest it even more if it's possible. But it's a good way to listen to some good podcasts and everything. But he's saying is the days when we can do mowing the grass in Gaza or a 34-day incursion into southern Lebanon to take care of Hezbollah or to take care of the problem in Syria with chemical weapons factories and chemical weapons stores and other things around Damascus are over. We can't do that anymore. And this, in my view, has enormous, ginormous, this is the equivalent of a Category 5 prophetic storm, I guess is the best way to say it. And people need to be paying attention and be aware of what is going on and what's happening. Let me just find this quote here at the end. He says this: against this grim backdrop in Lebanon, the developing realities in Syria must be taken into consideration. The deployment of Russian forces and the growing dominance of the Iranian presence in the country. If the ominous developments in Lebanon can, in large measure, be ascribed to the flaccid policies of the Olmert government in Syria, they are due to those of the Obama administration. And by the way, Caroline Glick's article Friday in the Jerusalem Post, go read it. It's called When Respected Agencies, well, I've got a title here. I'm almost done, really, I am. It's called, here it is. When Great Institutions Lie. And she uses two examples. One is Stanford comes out with this ridiculous report that there's really not a problem with anti-Semitism on American college campus and university campuses. Published under the Stanford name. And she says the left does this all the time. They're ruining these institutions. The other is the Holocaust Museum in America. Issued a report. Now, I don't know what this has to do with the Holocaust Museum mission, but their report was the Obama administration didn't do anything wrong in Syria that caused Assad to have chemical weapons, or they didn't do anything wrong in Syria, the way they conducted things. Now, what you don't know in the background is that on the way out the door, Obama made a number of appointments to the board of directors of the Holocaust Museum. And one of the guys that was appointed as a board of director person at the Holocaust Museum was, guess who? Ben Rhodes, the children's storybook writer, the fiction writer that became Obama's speechwriter, and the guy behind a lot of what happened with the Iranian deal. And so all this is going on, and we have the physical things on the ground in Syria with Russia and Persia. You need to pay attention. You shouldn't be like the people I saw interviewed at the beach in Clearwater Beach, Florida yesterday. Oh yeah, it's probably going to be a big storm, but we're going to ride it out. I got a gallon of water. You know, folks, that's not why the Lord laid all this out for us. And he gave us all this information. It was so we would be ready and prepared and be able to help others. That's what it's about. So let's pray. Father, thanks again for your grace in sharing this information with us. And Lord, I just pray that you would give wisdom to all of us as we look at your word and analyze the events that are taking place in increasingly rapid order around us. Pray that we would use that as a tool to witness to people and to reach out and help people. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.